Let's take a look at the SR200 and how to disassemble it for maintenance, repair, or upgrades. While it's not necessary to take the blaster apart frequently, it is recommended occasionally to keep the blaster functioning at its best. Before we get into the process itself, let's go over what you'll need. For tools, you'll only need a Phillips head screwdriver and the included spring removal tool, as it has a nut driver built into it that allows you to install and remove the main hardware on the SR200. If you don't have the spring removal tool at hand, you can use a size 8 metric nut driver for the nuts and a large flathead screwdriver to remove the spring rest. If you want to remove the grip, the included Allen key will handle that for you. The last bit you'll need is lube. The brand used in-house is Super Lube, and while you'll only need one of these, both could be considered optimal, and we'll go over that when we get to it. First things first, let's unscrew the end cap on the back of the blaster. Or if you have the buffer tube and stock attached, that can be similarly unscrewed. Once removed, the spring removal tool can be used to take the spring rest and subsequently the spring out as well. With those out of the way, time to flip the blaster over and unscrew the nuts on the front of the blaster using the spring removal tool or your size 8 metric nut driver. Now you can pull the entire muzzle assembly off. This is composed of 4 pieces: the orange barrel sleeve that is fit inside the orange muzzle piece, a small gray spacer, and the larger black shroud with orange armory on it. Also, the file for this barrel sleeve will be linked in the video info for anyone who wants to design their own scars or B-cars to work with the muzzle design of the SR200. Setting those aside, we can return to the back of the blaster, where if we grip the back plate firmly while holding the upper body, we can slide the 4 structural rods out of the blaster all at once while they remain in place on the black and gray pieces of the back plate. When pulling these out, you may note that the top rods are looser and easier to pull than the bottom rods. That's normal and to be expected by design. These rods can be removed one by one if you prefer, or if you need to do repair or replace just one of the rods. The all-at-once method is just nice to be able to remove them quickly and keep everything together. It's important at this point that you're aware that with these structural rods removed, some areas of the blaster are weak, so be careful when handling. Specifically, be careful with the front barrel shroud area where the plastic is typically held in place by both the rods and the black front shroud we removed earlier. From here, we can lift the piece with the SR200 text on it off the back of the blaster. Be careful when doing so, as there is some print bridging beneath this piece, and if you're rough with it, you can break some off of that. While this won't cause any structural issues, it can lead to some small pieces of plastic getting into the plunger tube or other elements, which may impact performance. Once the back piece is lifted off, the catch should be sitting loosely in front of the plunger tube and easy to pull out. It may fall out on its own depending on the angle you were holding the blaster at, and if it does, ensure that you have both the catch itself and the small catch spring with it. You can also pull the plunger itself out of the plunger tube. It's advised to have something clean to put this on so the lubed part of the plunger doesn't pick up any debris while outside of the blaster. This is where we can relube the plunger and the breech O-rings without any more disassembly required. If you pull the front grip back all the way, then just enough of the breech will be exposed, revealing the O-ring that you'll want to lube. This brings us back to the 2 different lubes mentioned earlier in this video. The 2 types of Super Lube brand lubes used in-house are the silicone lubricating grease and the multi-use synthetic oil. You can stick to either of these, but we'll use both in this video. On the breech, we're just going to use the grease to get good coverage on the O-ring. After that, we can grab the plunger itself and also apply a layer of grease to the O-ring around it as well. This is where we take the synthetic oil and apply a small bit on the O-ring and spread that all across. From here, we can slide the breech back into the plunger tube so it doesn't pick up any debris. And if relubricating these parts was all you needed to do, you are good to reassemble the blaster at this point. But we're going to continue disassembly for everyone's knowledge. A couple notes on lubing parts before we move on. The grease is going to last you longer, while the oil will be slicker, but also need to be reapplied more often, which is why a combination is used in-house. The other is that the material for the plunger can absorb the lube, so to offset this, before they're shipped, some extra lube will be applied to help saturate the piece so that when you go to relube in the future, you shouldn't have that issue. But if it seems like your lube is drying out sooner than expected, keep that in mind. At this point, we can grab the upper part of the body in one hand and the lower part of the main body in the other, and firmly but gently begin to rock the two halves apart until the clips holding the upper and lower together disengage and allow us to entirely separate them. We can further separate the lower by lifting the magwell out of the slot it sits in on the trigger assembly. After setting those aside, we can slide the priming grip back all the way, and it should pop the plunger tube out just far enough for us to pull it out. And we can also slide the barrel out of the front of the blaster. Then let's also slide out the grill pieces that cover the priming bars on the front shroud. This gives us access to the screws holding the priming grip to the priming bars. After unscrewing those on both sides, we can slip the grip out and pull the breech and priming bars out of the back of the blaster where we previously removed the plunger tube from. We're almost there. The rest of the pieces should be very straightforward. There's a chance one of the remaining pieces has already fallen out, and that's the orange barrel coupler that sits in front of the breech. If it hasn't already fallen out, we can reach inside from the back and push it out the front of the blaster. The jam access doors can now easily slide out from the back of the blaster, and the same goes for the Picatinny rails on the top of the blaster. There is one more piece that can be removed on production models, and that's the little bow tie piece holding the two shroud halves together. If you need to replace one of them, you can take a flathead screwdriver and pop it out from the inside to separate the two halves. Let's just organize all our parts here really quickly to make putting it back together go a little bit easier. After swapping any parts that needed replacing, we can go ahead and get started with the reassembly. Unsurprisingly, we're basically going to go in reverse order from the disassembly. Starting with the jam access doors, let's slide those back in place and take the Picatinny rails and slot those back in as well. We can grab the priming bars and breech and put it back through the back of the shroud with the bars going through the slots on each side. To keep them from sliding back out, let's screw the priming grip back into place. Moving back to the back of the blaster and sliding the plunger tube back into place, we set the upper aside for a moment to slot the magwell back into the trigger assembly. Once that's in place, grab the upper and the lower halves and line up the slots on the upper with the clips on the lower and push the two halves together until the clips are fully seated. Grab the plunger and drop that into the plunger tube, and we're gonna take the catch with the attached catch spring and slip that over the plunger and into the little slot. Ensure that it's properly in place by testing the trigger and verifying the catch is moving. Once that's done, we grab the back piece with the SR200 on it and slide that back onto the blaster, covering the catch and spring. Slide the Picatinny rail on that piece back to expose the catch spring to make sure that it is underneath the shell and not on it. That would prevent the catch from functioning properly. Once verified, we slide the Picatinny rail back into place. Let's continue by sliding the grill priming bar covers back into their slots on each side and keep them held in place by grabbing the black and gray front muzzle pieces, ensuring they're slotted properly and pushing them into place. From here, we can stand the blaster up on the muzzle so the back is to us. This is where we take our butt plate with the 4 rods still attached from earlier and fit them all back into their holes. Make sure that the notch in the butt plate is at the top of the blaster when fitting the piece back on. And once all rods are in, we can push them all through together. You can do this one at a time if that's your preference as well. The bottom 2 rods may be a bit harder to get all the way through, and if one of the rods gets most of the way there and hits a bit of resistance right before the end, make sure that the nut is orientated the correct way to fit into its cutout. And if it is, just take a screwdriver or something similar and a few light knocks should get it seated all the way. Just a few steps left to getting back on the field with the SR200. Let's take that orange barrel coupler and with the protruded side facing towards the breech, slide it back into its place from the gap where the priming grip travels back and forth. To prevent that piece from falling out, let's put the barrel back in now, sliding it through the priming grip and into the coupler we just installed. Now we take the barrel cover and the muzzle pieces and insert the barrel cover into the muzzle and twist it to lock it into place. Once done, fit the connected pieces over the 4 rods and secure them in place with the nuts and covers. It's important to not over tighten these nuts as it can cause the blaster to not work properly. And it's actually why we make sure to install the barrel before the muzzle rather than at the same time to help prevent over tightening. You also may notice that the rods on the blaster in the video aren't all the same length. That's due to it being a pre-production model where the rods were all hand cut. Production versions are all the same length. Once everything is secured, we can flip the blaster over and it's just like swapping a spring out at this point. The one note to add is we can take a small amount of the super lube grease and put it on the threads of the blaster where the spring rest and back cap are. This will help the printed parts screw together smoothly and prevent binding, which can lead you to think the spring rest is screwed all the way in when it isn't. With the threads lubed, we can drop our spring in and screw in the spring rest for the spring and FPS combination we want with our spring removal tool. And we'll get a clear stop in the screwing when we reach the end. Screw on our back cap or buffer tube and stock, and the blaster is ready to go again. I hope this video has made it easy for you to disassemble, maintain, and reassemble your SR200. If you have any questions or would like clarifications, leave them below or email support@orangemodworks.com so they can be answered. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.